News at 5. On the heels of a sweeping criminal investigation at Waupun Correctional Institution after inmates there died, Action 2 News learned a special prosecutor declined to bring charges in a similar incident at Green Bay Correctional Institution years ago. Those incidents mentioned by the Dodge County Sheriff last week as he announced criminal charges against 9 former employees, including the warden at the Waupun prison. Over the last year, the deaths of 4 inmates have been made public, including one man who wasn't discovered until at least 12 hours after he died. In a first alert investigation, Brittany Schmidt finds out how a special prosecutor in Brown County concluded Green Bay Correctional also wrought with problems, but decided not to bring charges in 2 serious incidents.
Criminal charges stemming from a massive investigation into inmate deaths at Waupun Correctional Institution is putting similar incidents at Green Bay Correctional Institution back into focus.
They were investigated in Brown County. No criminal charges were filed in those incidents. However, we have similar issues that occurred during those incidents.
Action 2 News obtained 2 incident reports from the Brown County Sheriff's Office where criminal charges were referred but never prosecuted. The first case investigated involves the death of an inmate in May of 2021. According to the 81-page incident report, he was found unresponsive in his cell in the restrictive status housing unit. Records show Brown County investigators referred charges of abuse of residents of penal facilities to 2 GBCI employees, a correctional officer and a nurse, for denying him a wheelchair after he asked for one. A special prosecutor assigned to the case noted deficiencies in protocols and neglect of the inmate, but declined charges. Attorney David Weber writes he could not find sufficient evidence in support of facts deserving of a criminal charge that could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in court. He goes on to note, on the day the inmate died, body camera footage shows he was able to walk to his cell door on at least 5 other occasions prior to his request for a wheelchair. In his written decision, Weber does include a note to the Department of Corrections, saying there are systemic issues that must be promptly addressed at this facility, the harm being caused to both the inmates and the morale of those that are required to be working the environment is significant. The second case investigated by Brown County Sheriff's Office involved an inmate's attempted suicide in February of 2022. In an interview, the inmate told investigators he was ignored by staff when telling them repeatedly he had suicidal ideations. The investigation revealed a GBCI employee used pepper spray on the inmate in an attempt to stop the inmate from hurting themselves or to prevent a possible assault on staff. The investigating deputy says, quote, "From my training and experience, I would not have used OC spray in this situation," end quote. Brown County investigators again referred charges of abuse of residents of penal facilities against a correctional officer and a sergeant at GBCI. A special prosecutor assigned to the case, David Weber, once again declined to issue any criminal charges. While he says there was neglect on behalf of GBCI, he says a jury would likely not convict given the number of other failings that contributed to this incident. He says, quote, "It appears the referred officers were involved in a series of missteps inexplicably intertwined with and in context of a fundamentally flawed system at GBCI. Attempting to place blame for this incident on just the 2 individuals here would be inappropriate," end quote. At the conclusion of both incident letters, Weber sent a strong message to the DOC, hoping the lack of criminal charges does not detract from the lessons that must be learned by the institution as a whole. It's the same warning the Dodge County Sheriff issued last week.
And a stern warning was issued by the investigator to the Department of Corrections, meaning this is not isolated to one facility in the Department of Corrections.
I'm Brittany Schmidt for Action 2 News.